So welcome to the south of France. We've come here to drive the new McLaren GT, which, as the name suggests, takes McLaren to a whole new segment, the Grand Touring segment. So it's the kind of car they hope you'll buy instead of an Aston Martin DB11, a Ferrari Portofino, something like that. The price is £163,000. Now, despite this being an all-new segment, this is McLaren, and we're familiar with the toolkit that they're continuing to use. So that effectively means a carbon fibre chassis with a mid-mounted V8 twin-turbo engine, 7-speed dual-clutch gearbox, and a rear-wheel drive layout. The carbon fibre chassis is derived from the 720S monocell 2, but here it's extra area at the back devoted to luggage space. And luggage and the journey and carrying all your stuff is all part of this car's GT character. It's quite an awkward shape, but you can apparently get quite a lot into it. And then under the bonnet there's quite a deep area as well, but that's at the expense of design, I would say. It's got quite an upright horizontal front, partly for ground clearance to give you approach angles and clear speed bumps, but also to give you a nice deep luggage bay. The surroundings are obviously quite familiar. It feels very much like a 570S with a bit more of a luxurious touch. So we've got nicer leather, things like these machined aluminium shift paddles, which really, does lend a more luxurious, tactile, sophisticated kind of feel. The twin turbo V8 is a 4-litre like the 720S, but there are important changes there too, including new turbochargers, a higher compression ratio, a new exhaust, and it's all designed again to make it more refined, a bit more luxurious than the more sporting McLarens. The chassis borrows from 720S with its proactive damping control, so it learns to read the surface and predict what might happen next. And that's one thing, as you start to drive this car, you realise how smooth it is. If we put it into comfort mode here on this switch down here, it's a really, really compliant, supple car. All McLarens are really compliant, but this is another level again. And that kind of feel goes into the rest of the chassis too. So the steering's a little bit more relaxed, the brake pedal has a little bit more travel before it takes up its slack. We're out in the D2 here, really good twisty road, and McLaren assures us that despite all this extra effort of refinement and putting more sound technique into this car, it's still a really good car to drive. They're still aiming for class-leading dynamics. So it's a funny kind of mix, really. How do they balance all those things? The steering's supposed to be a bit more relaxed than other McLarens, but it's a really good steering, hydraulic steering. It's got a bit more meat to it, I think, a bit more of a weighty feel around the dead ahead somehow. With this car being a little bit softer, there's not as much feel as you'd get in a 570S, but very accurate, very precise, easy to place on the road. And with this car being mid-engined as well on tight roads like this, you do notice the visibility. You've got a low scuttle here, there's the engine in the back, so you can really see and place the car very nicely, certainly more so than an Aston DB11, which feels quite bulky and big with its V8 or V12 up ahead of you. Now, one of my worries with this car was it's still got its flat plane crank V8, and that's more responsive for a sports car, but you do sacrifice a bit of refinement. And is it in keeping with a GT character? I'm not sure that engine note is. If you think of something like a really rich V8 or V12, it's still quite a gruff note. And there is, like a lot of McLarens, there is still turbo lag and not the sharpest throttle response. So when you accelerate, it takes a little bit to get that kick, as you probably saw then. But it is a quick car. This engine has got 612 brake horsepower. So when you do light those turbos up, there is a proper kick to it. Wow. Let's just wind this thing up here. Really quick gear shift still. Again, they're supposed to be a bit more refined, but there's no question that these are punchy, quick gear shifts. We just changed the chassis settings here to sport, and the powertrain, we already got that in track mode, so that's a pretty good compromise for the road, for a nice twisty road like this. This is certainly a car that you can take out on a great road and really enjoy. It's not as sharp as something like a 570S, but it's not a million miles away. It's still got a very decisive turn in. There's a bit more body roll, but you also get that lovely ride quality that makes it so compliant on a road like this as well, and so usable. I think the acid test for this car is going to be whether people who are looking for a Grand Tourer, something like an Aston DB11, actually want something derived from a mid-engine sports car. There is more luggage space in this car, but in some ways it's quite an awkward space. You've got things like the flat plane crank V8, dual clutch gearbox, which a GT would more commonly have a torque converter. I'm not convinced this is the right car for that market, but I do think it's a good car. I think McLaren has struck a nice balance between making it comfortable, usable and exciting to drive. Personally, I would err towards something more like a 570S as a sports car that's still very comfortable and usable, and then for a GT you go for something more traditional like a Bentley or a DB11. But for now, we've got the D2 ahead of us, so let's just use all that 612 brake horsepower and enjoy doing what this car does so well, which is be absolutely brilliant to drive on a great road like this.